Welcome back to Cyclist. Today we're looking at Matthew Richardson. Richardson is a velodrome cyclist, professional athlete from Australia. So this is one of the athletes people commented on in the Valerie Allman video. Had a quick look at his Instagram, a lot of good training footage. He qualified for the 2020 Olympics and he's a bronze medal from the 2020 World Track Cycling World Championships. And he is obviously a pedigree athlete, very good talent. Was a former gymnast at a national level from what I can see. Had a little elbow owie and then changed to track cycling and is obviously doing quite well considering he got to the Olympics. That was their best placing in 8 years at the World Championships for Australia. So he's obviously making some moves. He's a very young athlete. So someone commented and mentioned his name, and we had a look, and there's some very good training here. So we've got a couple of things we want to talk about. Obviously we don't know anything about the specifics of track cycling, but we can look at the elements of it, and as we do with other sports, look at what kind of training you'd want to be kind of focusing on for track and field cycling. What the fuck? For track cycling. So first up on priority list, we would have seen, for example, with that German cyclist we did years ago, maybe I think a year and a half ago, Forrester, yeah. So he had massive like he's synonymous with huge legs and massive squats, squatting something like 280 plus. Now Matt isn't squatting in the same levels as the German cyclist, but relative to his own body weight, I think these are close to or beyond 2.5 times body weight. So he's somewhere in the region of late 70s or 80 kilo, because there's a 150 kilo clean from him, and he said he's closing in on that double body weight clean. So we'll get to the clean in a minute, but we want to talk about those squats. What would you like to see from squats for people doing velodrome or track cycling?
I think in almost all the power sports, like the really high power output sports, I like to see people moving their squats very fast. And then something we've touched on before, but we should probably get into, is that usually in these kind of sports, or even in track and field sports, you'll get up to the heavy squats maybe once or twice a year, right? You'll have 2 periods of training where your 1RM squats, you're pushing heavy squats that are moving a bit slower than ideally what you'd want them to move. Those periods are really important, but what that gets you to is it gets you to where the meat and gravy of your training is those 3x3, 3x5, 5x3, 5x5, whatever it is. Those really important power output sets that are around somewhere between 60 and 80%, like wherever you've done your power analysis and wherever you produce the most power in those rep ranges at that weight. It's really important that weight is quite high. And that's what people miss out on a lot of time. They'll be doing like velocity based training, or they'll just be following sensible training protocols. They'll say, okay, I'm going to keep it at somewhere between 60 and 80%. I'll keep it quite moderate in terms of rep sets and overall volume. But you'll think, oh, I'm just going to stay at this percentage, and because I'm putting the most power output here at this percentage, that I'm doing things correctly. The great thing about match training is doing these kind of doing these kind of sets and reps at this very high power output, but the absolute weight is very high. And that's what you should be looking at. If you're one of these athletes, you need to be having those periods of training every year where you're pushing the 1RM up and artificially kind of raising that ceiling of where your squat number is. And then those times where you're training between 60 and 80% in those real power output periods of training where most of your time is spent, then those numbers on the bar are higher. And that's really important, that you don't just stick at 60 to 80% and stick at this kind of moderate rep range and just focus on your power outputs. It's really important that those power output training sessions are being done with actual heavy weights as well, and we see that here.
Yeah, so you want to see, for the cyclists in this style of sprint cycling, you want high force output, but you also want a high rate of force development, or high force output at a very fast over a short period of time. Technically, Matthew would never actually need to do a 1RM or any one of these kind of things. All you want to see is those average weights going up, like Fitz said. So if you only focus on the barbell speed, which they have like an accelerometer on the barbell, which is great, that's exactly what I'd be doing. I'm going to be recording sets and reps, but he'd also really want to be recording barbell speed. So velocity training is something that's getting a little bit more looking on the research. So for him, those average weights would always want to be getting heavier. He wants to be ability to produce more force, but he'd never have to do a heavy single. He just need to know he could do a heavier single. He never really needs to test that. He could always cycle through his cycle through. Hey. So you can do his 8s and his 5s and his 3s, you know, and keep working way through those and seeing those average weights go up, and never technically need to hit that heavy 1RM. Now, the heavy 1RM in isolation, it's going to move slow. That's the nature of 1RMs. You can almost predict what a 1RM, the speed it'll move in meters per second. For him, that's not a good thing. But in reality, in the grand scheme of things, it's going to make absolutely no difference. But if you didn't really want to go there, if you wanted to make things absolutely perfect, you could always stay away from those 1RMs and keep those weights moving fast but getting heavier. You just need that ability to do that heavier 1RM. In reality, though, you know, if he was doing this once, 2-3 times a year for a heavy single, that would make zero difference if you want to test it. You know, athletes enjoy testing 1RMs, especially if they're putting a lot of work into it. Now, the real issue there would be having those 1RMs every week. Doing really heavy, grindy squats multiple times a month would definitely be detrimental to him over the course of his career.
I think, like, in general, velocity-based training, or having speed trackers on the bar, or a linear transducer, or an accelerometer, whatever it is you're using to track it, it's gotten way more popular. It's gotten popular because people read more of the scientific literature, and they're reading more of the velocity-based training stuff, and there's been some good books brought out in it, and also the units themselves are becoming a lot more affordable. In sports like these, this is the time you need it. If you're a weightlifter or powerlifter, I don't really think you need a velocity tracker on your bar. I don't think it's really that valuable. But in case like this, in the power output sports, in the really like focused power output sports and speed sports, is very valuable. If you're in track and field or cycling or whatever it is, or throwing, I think it would be well worth your while getting some sort of linear transducer or accelerometer or something like that.
In the same vein as those heavy squats, we have some quite heavy pulls again. So we've done him doing 200 kilos for 3 reps, and he has that piece of equipment, and monitoring equipment on the barbell again. Of course, you always see these sprint cyclists always have huge asses. They got dump trucks.
Yeah, massive.
Like, they got some dumpies on them, you know, and that's for good reason. So obviously our ability to put force down vertically into the ground is very, very important for those sprint cyclists. And of course, a very productive and useful exercise in conjunction with the back squat and high bar back squat would of course be clean pulls. One of the things with these though is, for example, is you definitely want to be making sure these are moving quite fast, but again, you're looking for that same heavier weights. The only thing for these is the barbell speed can drop drastically on heavy deadlifts. You know, you can, at the same percentage for a heavy squat as a heavy pull, we could see a drastically slower speed on those heavy deadlifts. So it's something you really want to be careful of. He'd probably be staying well away from his 1RMs in comparison to his 1RMs and his squats. The average athlete would, maybe individual case might be different from Matthew, but in general, you'd want to be staying, you'd have a greater distance from your 1RM most of the time for these heavy deadlifts if you're looking for them for your speed strength or power training.
A few nuances here with Matt's particular deadlift. You'll see he's wearing weightlifting shoes, and he's using straps. I think definitely a cyclist, massively quad dominant. It's good to be in that kind of upright position as you're pulling. I think the other reason you might want a more upright position for a cyclist as they're pulling is they spend all of their time in this hunched over aerodynamic position. Like, back flexion is part of the sport, and when you see cyclists deadlifting a lot of the time, I've had experience coaching them 1-to-1, and a lot of the time you do get that rounding forward, particularly with the longer distance guys, but definitely if they're kind of looking at their aerodynamics, they want to be tucked in. So wearing weightlifting shoes, getting them to have their ass a small bit lower, making it a bit more quad dominant, can allow them just to flatten out that upper back a small bit more than they'd usually do. So
if you look at that 180 for a set of 8, that is a great example of how you'd want to see 85 or 90% of Matthew's squats moving all year round, is that speed on these. So obviously 180 for 8 is very, very heavy, but they're all moving very, very fast. And that's kind of, if you're eyeballing your own squats for training, for power output, that'd be the speed you want things to be moving. But again, at heavy weights.
Such a great looking squat too.
It's a phenomenal squat.
Really, really nice squat.
So next we're moving on to is the cleans. So we have Matthew doing a lot of different cleans. Haven't seen any snatches, but he has a near double body weight clean. So he said edging closer to 180, and he is at 150 here. They love training in the stadium,
in the velodrome.
They love it, yeah. So he is he's doing a 150 kilo clean. the real important thing when you're doing the Olympic lifts in your kind of speed training or power output training or speed strength training is that you definitely want to be aware that it's kind of a long-term goal with the benefits. So there's some short-term benefits with the clean, but if you're trying to get invested in the Olympic lifts for your kind of power output or your sport, you need to be looking at this with a view that, okay, I might not necessarily be very good at them now, and I might not be able to do meaningful heavy weights right now, but in a couple of years, if I do invest in this and I get some good coaching in it, this will have productivity for my power output. In isolation, you know, an off season for 3 or 4 weeks will certainly help a little bit, but if you really want to make that kind of long-term gains with and make the most out of them, you got to be looking at this for extended periods throughout the year. It doesn't have to be heavy and crazy intense, but it's something you need to be consistent with and committed to really get the benefits from them. And of course, if he's getting close to double body weight in the clean, he's obviously put the work into those. Now, of course, some athletes will progress faster than others. Some people will get closer to that kind of 1.7 to maybe double body weight cleans or power cleans, depending on your particular ability. And some people get those benefits sooner. Other athletes might progress slower with them and might even get to a point where it may not be feasible anymore. It may not be the smartest decision to go with is to do more cleans. It might be time to drop them and look at other avenues. But again, just make sure you're committed to kind of a longer term journey, a bit more consistency over a couple of years to get the real benefits, I think. So he's got him doing like 143, very, very good clean.
Really good, yeah.
So we were super lenient with the technical ability of athletes when they're doing cleans. As long as it doesn't look dangerous and as long as it's moving fast, we're very, very happy with that. You know, they were not looking for a huge amount of technical nuance.
Realistically, with a clean, like when an athlete is doing a clean, they're getting pretty much the same training stimulus as if they're doing a fast trap bar deadlift or a trap bar jump with some weight on it. You know, it's you really don't have to slam people's clean technique. I know people love to do it. Slam like throwers' clean technique or football players' clean technique. They're using it just as a tool to get better at their sport. You know, they don't necessarily have to be very good at it. In this case, Matt's phenomenally good at it. Yeah. Really high level of efficacy with the clean. Lovely technique, like very, very nice overall. He's yacked, which certainly helps with the weightlifting side of things. But yeah, I think he's a really, really nice clean technique.
So moving on to the last kind of aspect that I want to talk about from Matthew's training is the just general body composition and the shape he's in for his power output sports. So any of the power output sports, body composition is super important. Your power to weight ratio is very, very important. The most amount of muscle mass, the least amount of feasible fat tissue in your body, and then training these muscles to do the things you want them specifically to do is super important. And Matthew's in phenomenal condition. Obviously, you know, things like performance enhancing drugs across all these sports are synonymous with them, and they make a huge difference to this. But if you're a natural amateur athlete, there is no reason you can't be in good condition. So the main thing with this is a favourable body composition where you have a reasonable level of body fat, that you're still healthy and you can still maintain a amount of calories that support daily life and training, and of course then certain fat levels that allow for a healthy and kind of reasonable hormonal balance in the absence of exogenous hormones.
I think as well, if you're a natural athlete in a sport like this,
you want to be hot.
You have to pay more attention to the body composition side of things. If you're a non-natural athlete, if you're enhanced, the body composition thing will kind of just come. Like it will come along with the territory. They do massive amounts of training volume. They have massive amounts of caloric expenditure, and assuming you're not being an absolute asshole with your nutrition, the body composition thing will kind of work its way out after a number of years of training. If you're non-enhanced, you will have to pay more attention to it. Cycling has the weight versus power output thing in as much as any other sport will have it, right? So you're moving your mass through space, and the more mass you have means you have to put more force into the pedals, put more force into the ground and move you faster. The other thing cycling has is a massive focus on aerodynamics though, and I think any extra body frame, right, so any 2 or 3 inches wider across the shoulder is going to increase your cross-sectional area from the front, gives you more wind resistance. Any additional tissues on the body, it doesn't necessarily have to be fat, but any additional tissue on the body that's not being tucked into that kind of very rounded over forward facing sphere is non-ideal. So I think cycling really does emphasize that need for good body composition, that need for efficiency within the body composition. And it's not necessarily like, I know at Forrester, I can't remember the guy's name, but massive quads, right? They call him Quadzilla on YouTube. That's probably not the most efficient thing in cycling, in the same way where having massive deltoids wouldn't be the most efficient thing in cycling, because you're increasing that cross-sectional area and increasing that wind resistance from the front. When you see it, their helmets are designed in wind tunnels to make sure that air flows over them as efficiently as possible. It's the same way with extra muscle mass, extra fat mass, anything that's going to create an extra bulge from the front.
Of course, as well, we are seeing the survival of the fittest quite literally when it comes to elite athletes. So when we're looking at body composition, anatomy, limb lengths, literally just the shape of his body in this scenario is something that will rise to the top. So when we see these kind of body compositions as well, they are the ones who probably had to put the least amount of effort relative to the rest of their training to have this kind of body composition. So it's just something you need to be kind of aware of, and it might come a little bit easier for them due to their favourable genetics and obviously then being professional athletes and stuff like that. If you have any other athletes, we really appreciate when people put good ones, and there's a good few in the Valley Allman video, which we're going to get to as well. So if you have any ones, the great thing about this is we would have never seen Matthew Richardson ever, and it was some great training. We would have been unaware of them. There's just too many sports, too many athletes, too many where we would have never seen if they have training up on their Instagram or their social media platforms, or if there's stuff with them on YouTube. But when you let us know about stuff like this, everyone benefits, because we get great videos put up, we get to look at their training, and then you guys get to look at the videos like this. But also if there's people in like track, cycling, stuff like this, they get to see what that training looks like and our thoughts on it. So if you know of any sport or any sport at all where you know if someone is good and you think it would fit these videos, we'd love to see it. And if you leave the comments below, that's massively appreciated. We're always looking for people who do good training, not really fans of ragging on people. As you know, like people mentioned the Valley Allman video, we're not afraid to say it when it's not great, but ideally we prefer if it's good stuff, so we can highlight the good stuff and talk about why that stuff is good. Obviously some of the bad stuff needs to be highlighted sometimes, but only if it's really egregious. So we really are big fans of the good style training where it makes for more positive videos. We don't like ragging on athletes, of course, and we don't like ragging on their coaches, but Matthew was a good one as well, so it's great to see.
If you want programming, coaching, or one-to-one consultations with us, just follow the link below to the website. The coaching is pretty much free, but you can certainly put your name on the waiting list. It would be worth sending an email for anyway. And for all other questions, pop them in the comments down below.